2024. Yeah. Oh boy. For those of you new to this channel, since 2023, I've had this yearly tradition where every spring, I talk about and rank all of the animated shows I've watched from the previous year. But not before going on this massive diatribe about how the world's horrible and the animation industry is boned, followed by me repeatedly shoving in some sort of quote-unquote comedic exaggeration of my sadness and cynicism over the state of everything throughout various points in the video. Because that's what people are looking for when they click on a video on the best cartoons of the year. Despair! However, I think that it's time for me to retire that whole bit. For very obvious reasons, 2024 has been a thoroughly miserable year for me, and it has left me so utterly broken and hopeless that I genuinely can't think of a way to address how horrible things have been without giving this video an unbearably miserable energy. Like, y'all know how horrible everything is. I don't think I need to remind you of this every year when all you have to do is glance out the window and see that it's still not safe to go outside. So instead of doing that thing that I did in last year's video, where I go on this whole journey where I try and fail to not be cynical, how about I just spend this time talking about the cartoons I watched in 2024 and pretend that the world isn't falling apart at the seams. My deepest apologies to all three of you who found my lackluster attempts at making my despair funny, mildly entertaining. Go follow my Blue Sky account if you're interested in seeing my unfiltered crippling sadness. Like before, this list will consist solely of shows that I personally seeked out, and considering that I'm generally not the kind of guy to waste time with things I don't think I'll like, expect the tone of this video to be relatively positive. So if your favorite show isn't on here, it's because I either couldn't find the time to watch it, or I just wasn't all that interested in it. All that is to say, I'm not talking about Hazbin Hotel. Is it good? Is it bad? I don't know, and I don't care. I refuse to engage with that show beyond its pretty okay pilot, and that banger song stayed gone. Keep me the hell away from that discourse. This time around, we'll be covering 12 shows as opposed to last year's 20, because I'm not gonna lie, 2024 was nowhere near as strong of a year in TV animation as last year. While it obviously still had bangers, there were just a lot fewer shows that caught my interest. Although if I'm being real, the fact that I have fewer shows to talk about this year is kind of a relief, because I'm pretty sure making that 2023 video nearly killed me. There will also be a few anime shows on here, because cartoons and anime are the same, and it's my video, I can do what I want. Oh, and if you're wondering why the title is calling this video a top 10 when there are 12 entries, it's because top 10 is a more captivating title. Plus, I consider numbers 11 and 12 to be an honorable and dishonorable mention respectively, so it's technically not clickbait. Anyways, without further ado, here are my top 10 cartoons of 2024.
This is worthless.
It's less than worthless, my boy.
For last year's top cartoon video, in order to extend the length of the list, I made the executive decision to talk about a bad show that I didn't technically watch, but managed to become familiar enough with by observing the sheer amount of discussion surrounding it to the point where I felt comfortable enough talking about it. However, instead of Velma, a conceptually flawed idea that looked like a solid 3 out of 10, I'll be looking at the worst damn thing I've ever watched in my entire life. Now normally, I wouldn't be covering indie animated shows, since it usually takes a long while for these shows to get the funding for an episode 2, and it doesn't make much sense to judge an entire series based on a single episode. However, because the new norm has a budget of loose change and pocket lint, it was able to churn out 3 episodes within 4 months, and the way I see it, that's probably enough to get a good idea of an indie cartoon's quality. Plus, this isn't the only opportunity I'll have to talk about this ungodly sin, since making entire videos on the new norm is kind of passé at this point. Also, I say that I haven't watched this, but considering that the show's total runtime is 8 minutes, I've pretty much seen most of the series via the various videos talking about it. While everyone watching should be familiar with this quote-unquote show, considering how it took the internet by storm for being so bizarrely terrible, just in case you need a refresher, the new norm, in theory, is a conservative comedy platformed on The Bad Place about Norm, a conservative man who can't stand how much the world has changed over the years, butting heads with his leftist daughter Chloe, real original concept there, as well as Chaz, a non-binary teen who has to live with them for some convoluted reason. However, in execution, the show's about nothing.
How do we know when it's over?
I do!
Despite its claims of being political, Norm has quite literally nothing interesting or even remotely funny to say, instead opting to go on and on about how trans people are bad via cheap animation and stilted voice acting, without ever giving any explanation as to why Norm's hatred of the trans community is justified. Although I'm pretty sure that's because if Norm explained his politics, it'd devolve into him reading out Mein Kampf. Yet, despite its desperate attempts at upsetting the quote-unquote woke left, the new Norm is so hilariously and painfully incompetent in every way that instead of being offended, the leftists and trans people it tried to make fun of collectively decided to meme on it by making yaoi an MPreg art of the characters, as well as replying to every post Norm made with how much they want to bone him. Even right-wingers, people who will give money and support to even the most half-assed garbage out there if they think it'll hurt trans people in some way, clowned on this show. Not because they have any sort of standards, mind you, but because the new Norm actively makes the right-wingers that it tries to pander to look completely stupid. The heroes that we're meant to sympathize with and root for, Norm and Uncle Ruckus over here, are depicted as being confrontational, bigoted, irrational, ill-informed, miserable people who have nothing better to do with their lives but complain about everything and beef with literal children. Meanwhile, the straw leftists that we're meant to root against don't say or do anything wrong or particularly outrageous, and come across as way more level-headed and well-adjusted than the characters we're meant to side with. Yet we're supposed to point and laugh at them because they're either trans or pro-trans, which the bigoted grifters who shut this out want to present as being worse than making violent threats to a school board. You know, a literal crime. Like, that's not how you write characters. That's not how you pander to the alt-right. I'm not exaggerating when I say that the new Norm feels less like an awful quote-unquote anti-woke cartoon, and more like a heavy-handed leftist cartoon meant to criticize the conservative party. Dear God, this is literally just Velma but worse than for neo-Nazis. This show is such a fascinating failure on so many levels that I could easily squeeze out a 20-minute video dissecting the numerous ways that it fails. Or at the very least, I could have done that for the pilot episode. And that's because, as opposed to being so awful it's fascinating, the follow-up episodes are just lame in the most boring way imaginable. Unlike the pilot, episode 2 has literally nothing in it to meme on or discuss. No awkward laugh track, no unintentional condemnation of right-wing politics, no memorably awful lines. Uncle Ruckus is even dressed like a normal person, what the hell? It's nothing but incoherent nonsense that exists solely to jerk off the cringy white version of the High Evolutionary. There aren't even attempts at jokes here. Things just kind of happen. The closest thing to a setup and punchline here is Norm pointing at a drag queen and saying DEI hire. Now you see, it's funny because DEI is a term white nationalists hijacked and is now used to discredit and insult anyone who isn't a cishet white man. And Norm just said it. Why aren't you laughing? I only saw Big Joel's recap of this episode, and I still feel embarrassed for watching it. I couldn't even find a video of someone talking about episode 3, but from what I saw of it, literally nothing of note happens there either. The only thing of interest here is that these episodes seem to want to present themselves as centrist, while also refusing to make fun of or criticize their own side. But that's not even a fault that's funny bad. That's just lame. How do you people expect Salty to edge to this? I'm pretty sure it's safe to say that whatever so bad it's good appeal that the first episode had was a complete fluke, and that the rest of the series will be zero effort trash, so boring that not even shit posters will get anything out of it. Now on to the shows with actual effort put into them. And also like last year, we're following up The Garbage Show with a series that I really wish I liked more than I actually did. Based on Lincoln Pierce's book series of the same name, Max in the Midknights follows 10-year-old Max, a girl living in medieval times, who sets out on a journey with her new friends to fulfill a prophecy that'll free the kingdom from the grasp of the wicked King Ghastly. Now, despite being unfamiliar with the Max in the Midknights book series, I was really looking forward to this show, namely because of how much I enjoyed Nick's other adaptation of Lincoln Pierce's work, Big Nate, which was this funny, gleefully chaotic throwback to 90s and early 2000s slice of life cartoons with a great visual style that perfectly replicated the look and feel of claymation. I went into Max in the Midknights expecting it to be just as unhinged, creative, and visually stylish as Big Nate, and it's definitely one of those three things. Now, I can't emphasize enough just how great Max in the Midknights looks, posting a similarly stylish, claymation-esque look as Big Nate, albeit without the use of clip art and 2D effects. The way the camera moves and shakes during action sequences, and the use of widescreen, helps to bolster the already great presentation and give the show this cinematic feel. There are also points where characters will break through the aspect ratio, which is a fun detail that makes it stand out visually from other shows, and adds a bit of scale to the characters' actions. Writing-wise though, I found the show to be disappointingly straightforward. It's a very typical fantasy story about a group of kids adventuring to save the world, with there being very little in the narrative that really makes it stand out. Max is a likable enough, but pretty standard kid hero. The obstacles that she and her party face aren't all that memorable, the comedy isn't all that strong, and the characters weren't particularly interesting. I mean, I liked Millie, this spacey aspiring wizard girl, and I did find it funny how gleefully murderous Ghastly was. Seriously, it's hilarious how this Nickelodeon show got away with having a character constantly rave about wanting to execute children. There's also a bit of fun absurdity in there, like mumbling the wizard living in a retirement home in the 70s for some reason, although they don't really do a whole lot with it. Beyond that, the writing, while perfectly serviceable, really isn't anything special. That said, it's at least nice to see a serialized, 22-minute, kind of action-oriented cartoon airing on Nickelodeon, especially now that the era of serialized kids cartoons is all but over at this point. It just kind of sucks that, like the previous Nicktoon based on a Lincoln Pierce work, Nick isn't doing jack to promote it. Something to Nickels. Overall, despite the writing being largely unremarkable, Max and the Midknights is still a solid enough kids show with more than enough visual flair to compensate for its pretty unremarkable narrative.
What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
Man, DC really isn't letting up on its attempts to make the Suicide Squad a household name. An anime and a AAA game in the same year? That's the kind of attention that Wonder Woman could only dream of. Suicide Squad Isekai sees Harley Quinn, Peacemaker, Deadshot, Toy Ship and Bloodsport, Best Boy King Shark, and Clayface get recruited by Amanda Waller to explore Fantasy World in order for the US government to gather their resources, having only 72 hours to complete their mission before the bombs of their heads get set off. Further complicating matters, this ragtag group of violent weirdos and screw-ups find themselves getting caught up in a war between two neighboring kingdoms and have to face off against a mysterious figure orchestrating this conflict, as well as the first team of supervillains that Waller originally sent to explore this world. Now, like many, I've grown more than a bit tired of the oversaturation of the Suicide Squad. While we did get James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, which is straight up my favorite live-action comic movie ever, most everything else we've gotten out of this team hasn't been particularly great. Unless the recent comics are good. I wouldn't know, because I'm too basic to read comics that don't have Sonic the Hedgehog in them. Fortunately, unlike Kill the Justice League, Suicide Squad Isekai isn't a complete disaster. In fact, it's pretty enjoyable for the most part. What makes Suicide Squad Isekai work is that it doesn't go the route of some of the mainstream adaptations and make the squad this team of wisecracking lovable rogues that scream, "We have Guardians of the Galaxy at home." Instead, it goes down one of the two viable roads to take when writing this team. Either make them these genuinely messed up, mentally and emotionally damaged hardened criminals and screw-ups who are willing to do bad things in order to survive, or do what this show does and just make them the biggest assholes on the planet. The Suicide Squad here consists of horrible, violent, unhinged maniacs who are unrepentant killers and can barely tolerate each other's company. Except for King Shark, he's just a hungry boy. Just look at him go, eating people alive. I love him. Anyways, the Suicide Squad are the absolute worst kinds of people you could imagine, and watching their antics is wildly entertaining. However, despite how well the squad are handled, the show does unfortunately fall into some of the same pitfalls that plague recent Suicide Squad adaptations. Namely how, despite the whole gimmick of the team being that any of these characters can die, there's never a sense that they're in any real danger. And lo and behold, all of the main characters survive Season 1, which is just kind of what happens when your team consists of well-known DC characters. Fortunately, this is somewhat circumvented by the squad having to go up against and kill other, albeit far less marketable, DC villains. While the group is kind of lacking in the personality department, it's still fun seeing these characters go at it with each other. As for the rest of the characters, they're fine enough. Rick Flag is basically useless here, though he does make for a decent straight man to the squad's antics. While Amanda Waller is ruthless and dangerously competent as usual, I just wish we got to see more of her. Then there's this show's take on the Joker. Oh dear god, I fucking hate him. Everything from his cringy ass design to his pretentious dialogue is just beyond awful. The way both Harley and the show constantly show for the Joker is just obnoxious. Oh, look how cool the Joker is. He's playing 3D chess while the rest of us are just playing checkers. That's sexy evil genius. Oh, but we can't have him be too evil. So let's glorify his abusive relationship with Harley. People love that about Suicide Squad 2016, right? Please, for the love of God, stop trying to make the Joker a Tumblr sexy man. It has never worked. It will never work. The show's brought to life by some stellar animation courtesy of Wit Studio, the studio that animated for Spy X Family, that one show with weird anti-Semitic undertones, and a bunch of other stuff that I'm barely familiar with. The show provides plenty of fun, chaotic action sequences, as well as giving some great reimagined anime designs for the DC characters, with one very obvious exception.
You can't just put on some tattoos and some fake teeth and make me think that you're some kind of crazy person.
Now, despite me loving the show's look and lead characters, there is one noticeable issue that I think holds back Suicide Squad Isekai, and that's the whole Isekai element of the story. Despite how absurdly fun of a premise putting the Suicide Squad in a fantasy world is, I just don't think the series does a whole lot interesting with the concept. The setting itself is just a generic fantasy world, and the show does way less to play with the tropes of that kind of setting than you'd expect. The fantasy characters, as well as the plot, didn't do a whole lot for me. I don't remember the names of any of these characters, and I honestly wasn't invested in the conflict with the fantasy world at all. The stuff with Harley Quinn inspiring the princess to rebel against her corrupt mother was a bit interesting, and the squad all getting magical girl transformation sequences in the season finale was fun, but beyond that, the Isekai stuff just didn't do it for me. Honestly, if this were a typical Suicide Squad plot, and Amanda Waller sent them to a fictional nation with a monarchy, like say Pokoistan, I don't think a whole lot would have been lost. Granted, if making the Suicide Squad anime an Isekai was the only way to get Sakuga of King Shark being a hungy boy, then I think that's a pretty fair trade-off. Overall, despite its flaws, Suicide Squad Isekai is still a pretty fun show that's able to make up for its faults with an entertaining leading cast and delightfully chaotic animation. If there's a season 2, I can see myself checking it out. My one hope is that it ends with Harley Quinn beating the Joker to death. Seriously, fuck that guy.
Cousin!
You know, it's funny that I said earlier that I wanted to avoid participating in discourse, yet here I am talking about Primos, that year's animated series that the internet relentlessly dunked on to an obsessive degree before it even premiered. Because there always has to be one. This time though, said relentless dunking on was based on claims that this show was invoking Mexican stereotypes, and that series creator Natasha Klein despised her own culture, with many ignoring important context and information from Klein that would have cleared up any potential concerns, as well as buying into lies spread by bad faith actors.
You really think someone would do that? Just go on the internet and tell lies?
Keep in mind, this outrage was based solely on the show's theme song, because we can't just not be reactionary on the internet. And lo and behold, when Primos finally released, most everyone deemed it to be completely inoffensive. Wow, it's almost like the months people spent harassing this woman based on easy to debunk lies were all for nothing. God, this entire thing was so stupid. If you want a more thorough examination of the Primos discourse, I'd strongly recommend Pan Pizza's and the Wacky Deli's excellent videos on the situation. With that nonsense out of the way, on to the show itself. Primos follows Tater Ramirez Humphrey, a 9-year-old Mexican-American girl who decides that she wants to spend her summer vacation trying to find herself so she can reach her final form. Oh, sick, an amphibia reference. Unfortunately for Tater, her plans are put in jeopardy when her mom invites all 12 of her cousins to spend the summer at their house. Now Tater must continue her summer quest to find her calling in life without losing her mind having to deal with her cousins who don't exactly value her personal space. Admittedly, I initially intended on avoiding this show altogether, not because I thought it looked bad, but because I just didn't want to participate in the discourse. However, out of morbid curiosity, I decided to check Primos out a few months after its premiere, and I honestly ended up enjoying it more than I thought I would. I was really surprised by how much I ended up loving Tater as a character. She's creative, imaginative, ambitious, and unlike other Disney Channel female leads, is just this little shit. She's often self-centered, tends to prioritize her goals above the needs of others, and starts out beyond aggravated over having to share a living space with her Primos. Despite this, however, it's easy to see that Tater's a good kid at heart, who will ultimately do the right thing in the end, and she does gradually come around to her cousins. She's just a really fun lead, and I love how much she stands out from other Disney Channel protagonists. That said, I can't really say the same for the rest of the cast. while Tater's family is likable enough, I can't say that they're all that memorable of characters. Actually, scratch that. Tater's younger yet taller sister Nellie is really fun. She radiates a similar little shit energy as Tater, but in a more snarky, I don't want any part in this kind of way. It's a shame the show doesn't use her that much. She's honestly my favorite character. Visually, the show isn't really anything to write home about. While the backgrounds look nice, Primos has a very typical 2010s thin line art style, with very little setting itself apart from other cartoons of that era. That said, the imagination and song sequences look really good, with some really creative visuals. Speaking of which, holy crap do the songs in this show go absolutely nuts for no reason. Like, this is ultimately just a 7 out of 10 cartoon, but I haven't seen songs of this caliber from a Disney Channel show since the likes of Tangled the series. Now odds are, you've probably heard his killer electro swing villain song, A Little Bit Bad, given how it kinda blew up online, but you have to believe me when I say that there are so many songs in Primos that are every bit as catchy. Seriously, the songs in Primos just have this ridiculous amount of energy to them, something that Disney's film division could seriously use. The great soundtrack doesn't even stop at the vocal tracks. Primos' score is done by none other than Jim Lang, best known for his stellar work on Hey Arnold, and the man has not missed a beat since then. And now it's time for the obligatory comparison to the Loud House, because someone watching would probably ask me about it if I didn't bring it up. Despite the internet immediately leaping to call Primos a Loud House ripoff, I think the comparisons between the two are largely superficial. If anything, I think that Primos serves as a more chill, grounded alternative to the more cartoony, faster-paced Loud House. I think that fans of the Loud House, who are turned off by the more fantastical tone of the later seasons, would really dig this show if they gave it a chance. In fact, many of the problems people claim to have with Primos would be alleviated if they just sat down and watched the damn show, instead of judging it based on the theme song alone. Now, I fully understand that this only means so much coming from someone who isn't Latino, but I don't think that Primos comes across as stereotypical or offensive at all. There wasn't a single moment where I got the sense that the show's creator felt anything other than genuine love and appreciation for Mexican heritage. This entire show, being based on Natasha Klein's own childhood, is just her expressing that love and appreciation through her very unique, specific relationship with her culture, and it makes me sad that so many people believe that this is the wrong way to represent her own culture, as if there's a singular right way to do representation. Now, don't take this as me calling Primos this absolute masterpiece. While there are good jokes here and there, the humor isn't anything to write home about, with the show being more charming than it is funny. Also, despite having some standout episodes, the writing is nowhere near as sharp as other Disney Channel slice of life shows, like Big City Greens, The Ghost of Molly McGee, or KIF. That said, there's still this genuine charm and sincerity to Primos that makes it a pretty enjoyable watch. It's just unfortunate that the chances of this show getting a second season are pretty slim. At the very least though, it does seem like Primos has gradually developed a small cult following, and I've even heard some Latino people who've watched it and claim that they would have loved seeing something like this growing up. So who knows, once all the dust settles, maybe people will look back on it thinking, you know what? That show was alright. Regardless, while Primos might not be amazing, and it certainly won't be everyone's cup of tea, it's still a sweet, charming little show that really did not deserve the heat it got.
So I make this wish.
Fairly OddParents: A New Wish follows Hazel Wells, a 10-year-old girl whose family moved to the city of Philadelphia. Between having to go to a new school and her brother leaving for college, Hazel finds herself feeling alone and miserable. This leads to her catching the attention of her new neighbors, who turn out to be none other than Cosmo and Wanda, who've decided to come out of retirement and become her new fairy godparents. Okay, so I may have kind of messed up with this entry. You see, as I was writing about my opinions on Fairly OddParents: A New Wish, I discovered that I had a lot more to say about it than I initially thought. As in, my somewhat abridged thoughts on it still amounted to a solid 10 minutes worth of video, which would have absolutely murdered the pacing of this list. In fact, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I really wanted to go in depth on my feelings towards A New Wish, 6 months after the first and likely only season ended, because I am just completely incapable of covering something while it's still relevant. That said, I may have an idea for a bigger Fairly OddParents video later later this year, where I'll be saving my more complete thoughts on this show. Now, if you want my most basic feelings on A New Wish, I think it's great. Hazel's a great lead, even better than Timmy in my opinion. The show undoes the flanderization that the legacy characters went through in later seasons of Fairly OddParents. A lot of the ideas and concepts introduced in the OG show are improved and expanded upon, and it managed to do the impossible and translate Butch Hartman's style into 3D without having the characters look like nightmarish abominations. The only thing really holding it back from surpassing the original Fairly OddParents is that the limitations of CG causes its wishes to be smaller in scope, leading to less imaginative, not as memorable scenarios. That said, the show still improves upon the original Fairly OddParents in quite a few areas, and for the second time, we get to see how much Butch Hartman's writing style really held his shows back. I already referenced the Two Nickels meme earlier. Tales of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is the latest show in the TMNT franchise, and a continuation of the 2023 hit film TMNT Mutant Mayhem. The series sees the further adventures of this iteration of the Turtles as they adjust to a new life out of hiding, while continuing to defend New York City. Now, despite there being a small, deeply petty part of me that resents Mutant Mayhem for getting dealt a far better hand than Rise, the best version of the Turtles, I still thoroughly enjoyed the film. The beautiful, sketchy CG art style made it stand out visually from any other animated film out there. The Turtles being voiced by actual teenagers made them even more endearing than they already were, and having it end with the Turtles accepted by human society made it feel like no other TMNT project before it. So obviously, I was curious to see how a show could bridge the gap between the film and the upcoming sequel, and I was largely happy with what we got. Tales is divided into two 6-episode story arcs, with 4 episodes of each arc focusing on an individual turtle separated from the rest of the group, which was a smart way to really give the audience a stronger feel as to how these characters tick, given how the movie was primarily focused on Leo and his growth. We also get to spend a bit more time with the other mutants, sans the ones whose voice actors they couldn't afford, as well as this continuity's very different but still pretty interesting takes on classic characters like the Purple Dragons and Bishop, although it's an absolute crime that we never get to see Bishop rocking a suit and shades. The character writing and humor is just as good as it was in the movie, and the conflicts of both story arcs are pretty strong, although I don't really understand the framing device of having both arcs being stories recounted by Leo and Splinter respectively. It doesn't add anything to the show, and given how much time they spend separated from everyone else, it just raises the question of,
How did you know about the parts you weren't there for?
This show also does a phenomenal job of translating the gorgeous art style of Mutant Mayhem into 2D, with it still maintaining the sketchy art style that looks straight out of a middle school sketchbook, as well as the same grunge garage band feel. That's to say nothing of the great animation and fight sequences. Granted, it doesn't have the same level of style and flair as Rise, but let's be real, very few cartoons do. Unfortunately, the minor gripes I have with Mutant Mayhem are carried over into Tales, namely the pop culture references being a bit too frequent for my liking, as well as a few lines seemingly confirming that this continuity is committed to shipping Leo with April. No, it's not as nearly as grating as the other times the franchise did this, but can we please just stop having one of the Turtles crushing on April? It has never worked. It will never work. She's way better off as the Turtles' cool big sister figure. Why was Rise the only show that understood this? Leave that shipping nonsense with White April. Regardless, while still not hitting the ridiculous highs of the movie it's based on, Tales of the TMNT is still a fun, stylish expansion of the Mutant Mayhem continuity that manages to somewhat fill the Rise of the TMNT-shaped void in my soul.
Darkness! No parents!
Despite this being the legendary Bruce Timm's return to television, following 2011's Green Lantern the Animated Series, Batman Caped Crusader has proven itself to be extremely divisive. Like, even if you discount the white nationalist grifters, who can't engage with media beyond whining about the presence of black and gay people, audiences seem to be really split on this one. And honestly, I don't get it. This show frigging rules. Batman Caped Crusader takes the Dark Knight back to his 40s roots, and follows his early days as Gotham's protector, seeing him go up against a myriad of different baddies, as well as the corruption within the Gotham PD. Now, I'm a massive fan of Bruce Timm's work. The DC animated universe was a huge part of my childhood, being my first introduction to the world of DC Comics, with both Batman the Animated Series and Justice League Unlimited still standing as some of my all-time favorite shows. So hearing that he was not only making another Batman cartoon, but one that could tell darker stories that they couldn't get away with in BTAS, I was absolutely ecstatic. And for the most part, I think the show delivers. The style and tone of Cape Crusader is everything that I want out of a Batman work. It absolutely nails the gritty film noir tone, having a heavy cinematic feeling soundtrack, tense action, and gorgeous cityscape backgrounds of a 1940s Gotham. There's just this oppressive atmosphere all throughout the show that really makes Gotham City feel like this utterly seedy place overrun by crime. It definitely helps that the show displays just how immoral and depraved most of Gotham City's police force is, with every cop not named Jim Gordon or Renee Montoya being in the pockets of the mob. What I really love about Cape Crusader's tone is that despite telling grounded, mature stories, it's not afraid to embrace some of the more fantastical, comic booky elements of Batman. Like, this is the show where Batman fights gentlemen ghosts. That's the exact kind of nonsense that I want in serious Batman stories. Take notes, Matt Reeves. I love your work, but I don't know if my heart can take another realistic, fully grounded version of Batman. Give the Penguin his machine gun umbrella, you coward. Despite taking Batman back to its more pulpy film noir roots, the show actually takes quite a few liberties with many of its characters. While there are a few depictions that I don't care for, namely having Selina Kyle come from wealth, and altering Gentleman Ghost so thoroughly that he doesn't even look like a gentleman, seriously, why would you change such a perfect design? Most of them work really well, like how Harley Quinn, as opposed to being the wacky, Deadpool-esque anti-hero she's depicted as in modern media, is a perky psychologist who moonlights as this genuinely unnerving vigilante who kidnaps and breaks the minds of the wicked elites of Gotham. Bonus points for having Harley Quinn actually dressed like a Harlequin. One persistent criticism that I hear is that there's too much time spent with Batman's supporting cast, and not enough with Batman himself, which I don't get for two reasons. One, Batman the Animated Series also spent a ton of time with the supporting cast. Hell, some of the most memorable episodes were the ones that barely had Batman in them. And two, like Batman the Animated Series, Cape Crusaders has a stellar supporting cast. Barbara Gordon, Commissioner Gordon, Harvey Dent, Renee Montoya, Harley Quinn, they're all incredibly engaging, memorable characters that I love spending time with. Honestly, they're much more interesting than Batman himself. Which leads to my biggest problem with the show. I wasn't all that into this take on Bruce Wayne. This version of Batman starts out much colder and less compassionate than his usual depictions, with him being far more emotionally detached from others, to the point where he treats Alfred as nothing more than hired help, rather than a father figure. However, given that this is early into his career as Batman, the intention here is to show Bruce grow into the more compassionate figure we all hopefully expect the Cape Crusader to be. The problem here is that I never got the sense that Bruce was gradually growing as a character. While we do see Bruce's callousness come to a head, when his actions unwittingly cement Harvey Dent's transformation into Two-Face, leading him to reconsider his approach to crime, and start becoming less aloof towards Alfred in the season finale, I just don't think there was enough build up to that moment to make it feel really earned. Now, this isn't a straight up bad depiction of Batman, not at all, and the idea of giving him this arc where he becomes more compassionate and comes to value the people in his life like Alfred is a good one that has worked in the Batman, and hell, even the Lego Batman movie. The execution was just kind of lacking, and I sort of wish we followed Renee Montoya instead. Questionable handling of Batman aside, I really don't get why so many people weren't into Cape Crusader. Yeah, it doesn't reach the ridiculous heights of Batman the Animated Series, but it's still a really cool show that perfectly captures the aesthetic of Batman while telling some really compelling stories with some really compelling characters. More than anything though, I'm just glad that there's finally a Bruce Timm Batman work that doesn't ship Bruce with Barbara Gordon. Still won't make the trauma go away though. So I guess Cartoon Network shows getting sent off to Adult Swim is just gonna be a regular thing now. I mean, it's probably for the better with CN being basically dead, but it's still weird seeing a show like this premiere at midnight. Anyways, taking place in a world where wrestling is everything, Invincible Fight Girl tells the story of Andy Wells, a young girl who, despite being raised in a cow and Isle, one guess as to what their whole deal is, dreams of becoming the world's greatest wrestler. When her love of wrestling is exposed after defending her home from the notorious Perm Gang, Andy sets out into the city of Rustburn to train under the legendary Queso Poblana in the hopes of making her dreams into a reality. I've been looking forward to this show since its announcement back in 2022, and man was the wait worth it. Invincible Fight Girl is an unapologetically loving send-up to shonen anime, gleefully embracing classic tropes such as a plucky young hero who wants to be the very best like no one ever was, a fun zany world where society revolves around a single sport or activity, lengthy inner monologues, play-by-play commentary by onlookers, and tons of of wacky characters of various species with memorable design. Is that the pig with glasses again? God, why can't I escape you? Anyways, this show perfectly captures the goofy, fun charm of shonen like Dragon Ball and Pokemon. This is definitely gonna do it for folks who are still missing OKKO. Andy is an incredibly likable lead character with her unrelenting determination and kindness, making her very easy to root for. Andy also makes a few friends willing to help her out on her journey. Mikey, the world's most yoked 8-year-old and wrestling analyst who dreams of becoming a journalist, and Craig, a scam artist and Andy's self-proclaimed manager who dreams of becoming rich, with the three of them making for a really fun trio. I also really like how deceptively straightforward the narrative is. While the first episode makes it seem like Invincible Fight Girl will just be a typical shonen-esque story, the show quickly makes it clear that it's out to both celebrate and deconstruct classic shonen conventions, namely examining the idea of someone being fixated on achieving this one dream and the potential consequences of it. We get some interesting perspectives here, like this group of ex-wrestlers who had to give up on their dreams, but still managed to find happiness and meaning beyond fighting. On the flip side, we see these wrestlers whose fixation on being the very best by learning the perfect strike, something that Andy spends a season trying to master, turned into obsession and tore apart their family, as well as how the Perm Gang, this group of egotistical bullies, started out as dreamers like Andy who wanted to become somebody. It leads to some interesting self-doubt on Andy's part that turns into determination to not forget what's really important. The final few episodes also introduce the Global Wrestling Commission, who have some sort of history with Case of Poblana and is the reason why she quit wrestling. I can only imagine that this is setting up a conflict in a potential season 2 that shines a light on how wrestling agencies will relentlessly screw over their clients, and I'm really interested to see how it will play out. And it's really sad that the state of the industry means I have to say potential season 2. Sorry, I know, going back to not being sad and cynical. The animation is lively, and the characters are super expressive, both of which leads to a ton of great comedy. However, the area of the animation truly shines is its fight scenes. Not only are they beautifully animated and well choreographed, but my god are they brutal. You feel every impact that these characters land. There's a genuine sense that Andy is getting brutalized out there, and is constantly giving it her all in these fights. The characters in her monologues during the action, where they observe their opponent's techniques and explain their motives, further sells the intensity and personal stakes of these matches. It's also a smart way to save on the animation budget for the, again, killer fight scenes. Invincible Fight Girl is just a really fun, exciting show that definitely deserves more eyes on it, and I can only hope that we get to see Andy continue her journey in the future. Seriously, Zaslav, don't take this from me.
What, we some kind of
Monster Squad.
Oh my god, it's finally happening! The DCU is here and it is glorious! MCU? More like MC you later! I found a new cinematic universe to obsess over for the next decade! Creature Commandos is only the first installment, and I already feel this franchise changing my brain chemistry. Did you see the part where G.I. Robot killed Nazis? God, what a hero! And my boy Weasel's out there being the goodest boy ever. I'm so happy he's back from the Suicide Squad. The Bride's such a badass. Nina's just the sweetest thing and deserves all of the hugs. Eric Frankenstein's freaking hilarious and messed up. And Dr. Phosphorus, what a cool character. That entire sequence of his crime spree is still playing in my head on loop. Did you see the part where he killed those guys while he's flipping them off? Absolute cinema. God, this world is just absolutely nuts in the best way possible. James Gunn, sir, you have saved superhero movies, you absolute madman. Take it. Take my money. Just take it now, you glorious bastard. I mean, yeah. Creature Commandos. That's a show. Following the events of Season 1 of Peacemaker, in which the government shut down Task Force X, Amanda Waller, utilizing a loophole that states that she can't use human prisoners to do her dirty work, forms the ever so creatively named Task Force M, a team of quote-unquote monsters assigned under Rick Flag Sr. to protect the Princess of Pokolistan from being assassinated by Cersei. However, this seemingly straightforward mission completely spirals out of control, as a deeper conspiracy is uncovered, revealing that the fate of the world may very well depend on Task Force M. Now, I'm a massive fan of James Gunn's work. Like I said earlier, The Suicide Squad is my favorite live-action comic book movie, and I absolutely adore the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, as well as Peacemaker. So as you could imagine, I was very excited to hear that Gunn was taking over DC Films and burning down the clown show that was the DCEU. I was even more excited by the announcement that his DCU would open with an R-rated animated series created by him, and if my rant in the beginning there wasn't an indicator, I thought that Creature Commandos lived up to my reasonably high expectations. This This entire show is just James Gunn in his purest form. It's violent, raunchy, tragic, funny, absurd, and it puts the spotlight on a bunch of C&D listers who have no doubt received a massive boost in popularity because of this series. While I do understand why some think that Creature Commandos is too similar to his previous works, most notably the Suicide Squad, but the thing is, with me at least, I like the Suicide Squad. I like seeing a ragtag group of obscure comic book weirdos working together. I like hearing a variety of licensed songs play throughout different scenes. Taking all of that and putting it into an animated series, and you've made my exact kind of show. Also, I personally think that this series is able to distinguish itself from Gunn's other works through a very different, well-defined, memorable cast of characters, as well as by taking full advantage of the medium of animation, allowing James Gunn to make something far gorier and more absurd than anything he's made before. Said animation is done by Bobby Pills, the studio behind the show where Rayman says fuck, as well as a bunch of other adult cartoons that there's no way I can get away with showing clips of on YouTube. As per usual, they do an excellent job, providing some truly energetic, exciting animation. Honestly, James Gunn and Bobby Pills are such a match made in heaven, that's kind of surprising that they didn't collaborate sooner. James Gunn also uses Creature Commandos to do what he does best, take these stupid comic book characters barely anyone has heard of, and ask you to see the humanity within them, as well as the tragedy behind their circumstances. And I really do mean tragedy. The backstories behind the titular Creature Commandos are all beyond messed up in their own uniquely heart-wrenching way, with a brilliant animation, soundtrack, and editing all coming together to create some absurdly cool, yet genuinely haunting sequences. Seriously, I still haven't stopped thinking about those sequences with G.I. Robot and Dr. Phosphorus. And don't even get me started on the season finale, man. God, it just ripped my heart into 1,000 little pieces. All of this is tied together by a really interesting plot that's constantly keeping you guessing as to where all of this is going. With all that said, the show is sadly held back by its mere 7-episode length, because for some reason, television seasons are dismally short now. While the series is generally well paced, the finale, despite having great character and story beats, felt really rushed, resulting in an anticlimactic conclusion that raised way more questions than it answered. Fortunately, a season 2 is confirmed to be in the works, so I can only hope that it'll fill in the blanks that season 1 left. Despite this, I am still very excited to see more Creature Commandos in the future. It's pure James Gunn madness, and I absolutely loved it. If this shows any indicator of how creative and unapologetically absurd the DCU will be, then this new shared universe is going to be something truly special. Speaking of which, oh my god, did you see the trailer for Superman? That soundtrack went so hard. They're bringing crypto to the big screen for the first time, not counting that other time they did. This is the level of sincere comic book silliness I love. The edgy Superman era is officially dead. Rest in peace, this you piece of crap movie. And we're gonna get so many cool shows, including a Blue Beetle cartoon. The hashtag Blue Beetle Battalion stay winning. Dude, forget Batman v Superman. Peacemaker v Rick Flag Sr. is about to go down. We're also gonna get a Batman movie that isn't realistic and grounded, and Jason Momoa is gonna play Lobo, and Supergirl will hopefully be in a good movie, and Clayface is gonna get his own movie that doesn't cost $200 million, and
Fire! Fire!
Netflix throwing over an amazing show truly is a tale as old as time. You'd really think I'd be numb to it by now. Putting aside my grievances with streaming and how Netflix no doubt hates me specifically, Jentry Chau vs. the Underworld tells the story of, well, Jentry Chau, a Chinese-American teenager who was born with the ability to shoot fire from her hands. While her powers were dormant since she accidentally burned down half her hometown 8 years ago, they return when, at her 16th birthday, she is attacked by a demon serving Mr. Chang, a man who made a pact with an evil spirit who wants Gentry's powers for himself. Rescued by her great aunt, or Gugu, Gentry is forced to come with her back to her hometown, where she'll have to prepare to fight the evil spirit, while also coming to grips with her past and try her best to live a normal life. While the concept of a teenager getting dragged into some supernatural nonsense when they just want to live a normal life is a staple of many go-to-school save-the-world type shows, believe me when I say that Jentry Chau is an entirely different beast. Thanks to the PG rating, the series is able to go far deeper into into Gentry's angst and inner turmoil than its contemporaries ever could with their leads. And my god, you just feel for Jentry here. Jentry herself is such a believable, likable, well-written teenage character. All this girl wants is to escape the trauma of accidentally burning down half her town, but it just keeps on coming back to haunt her, and you just never stop feeling bad for her. To make matters worse for Jentry, she also comes to the gradual realization that Gugu, who's basically the only family she has, is most definitely keeping things from her. It leads to some really compelling tension between the two that makes the audience question just how much Gugu truly cares about Jentry, especially as we learn of the genuinely shady stuff she's pulled. This show just has a lot of great angsty teen drama to it. Speaking of which, because it's an animated show centering on a high school girl, of course there just has to be a love triangle in there, and wait, it doesn't take over the plot? And it gets resolved in a reasonable amount of time? Jentry even has a compelling dynamic with both of her potential love interests? You mean to tell me that shows can just do that? Now, if the whole deep-seated trauma of destroying half your town thing wasn't a dead giveaway, Gentry Chau does not hold back with the darkness it brings to its narrative. To put things into perspective, the first episode ends with Gugu getting fatally stabbed by Mr. Cheng, who's just a great, terrifying main villain, by the way. Granted, she comes back as a ghost, which she's surprisingly chill about, but still. As to be expected from Titmouse, Gentry Chau looks great with its slick, expressive animation, a color palette that really pops, and great character designs. Special mention goes to the intro, because holy crap, this has to be the best cartoon opening of the 2020s. Man, I swear, you rarely get cartoon theme songs as hype as this now in these days. It's also cool that we have a show that really delves into Chinese mythology and folklore. The DU especially makes for a really memorable depiction of the Underworld, and the spirits that reside in it have some seriously sick designs. It's just unfortunate that the pacing takes a serious nosedive in its final 3 episodes. It's very obvious that the creator envisioned Gentry Chau as 2 10-episode seasons rather than a single season consisting of 13 episodes, because those final few episodes are very densely packed and provide very little time for the story to breathe. The most jarring thing about this, though, is that Gentry's love interest, Michael's entire storyline, from his desire to choose the direction he takes in his life, to his sudden, unexplained ability to see into the future, ends up getting completely dropped without a resolution. As weird and disappointing as that is, I can't really hold it against the writers. They were forced to cram a season's worth of story into 3 episodes, so prioritizing their main protagonist's arc above all else makes sense. Despite this, the show's still able to provide a very satisfying conclusion that hits all the right emotional beats. I basically feel the same way about these episodes as I do the Rise of the TMNT finale. It's a bit rushed, and there was clearly more planned, but all things considered, they're way better than they have any right to be. All in all, despite some pacing issues, Gentry Chau vs. the Underworld is a certified banger. It's equal parts fun and gripping, and serves as an excellent, fully realized take on the tried and true go to school save the world formula. Give it a shot. I can guarantee that it'll get you like a moth to a flame. That was a ridiculously forced way to reference the lyrics to the theme song, and I'm not sorry at all for it. Seriously, that intro, man.
X-Men, welcome to die!
You know, given the current state of Marvel Studios, it's kind of a god-given miracle that we managed to get something as sincere and emotionally compelling as X-Men 97 out of it. The MCU could really use that kind of energy right about now. X-Men 97 is a follow-up to the wildly popular and critically acclaimed X-Men the Animated Series. Taking place a year after the original show's finale, the X-Men, still reeling from Professor Xavier's departure, are continuing the fight for mutant rights. Only now, they have the aid of a reformed Magneto, who's now leading the team after he was given the X-Mansion and Xavier's will. Despite how popular X-Men the Animated Series was, for whatever reason, I just never watched it all that much when I was younger. In fact, I was never really super invested in the vaguely defined 90s Marvel animated universe, especially when compared to the DCAU. However, after seeing some genuinely intense clips from X-Men 97 floating around online, I figured that I owed it to myself to finally check out the original series. And yeah, even after nearly 30 years since its conclusion, X-Men the Animated Series holds up super well. While it does show its age in a few places, like the at times janky animation and the occasionally flat vocal delivery, the drama was always gripping, the storylines were always compelling, and it always knew how to handle the dark subject matter it covered with the maturity and respect that it deserved. I'm honestly kicking myself for not getting into it sooner. This show really was ahead of its time. As for X-Men 97, Holy crap, this show goes so monumentally hard. No longer tied down by the limitations of being a 90s kids cartoon, X-Men 97 is able to get so much darker, going all in on showing the struggles and cruel realities that come with being a part of a marginalized group. This shows commentary on performative allyship and how there are people and groups who will throw marginalized people under the bus the second the opportunity presents itself, feels painfully relevant today, and also depressingly ironic given that this show's owned by Disney. This series isn't remotely subtle about its messaging, and it's honestly better off for it. Humanity will constantly repeat the same atrocities, pretend to show remorse over the past, only to resume the never-ending persecution against marginalized groups out of pure insecurity, regardless of the tolerance and patience so many people from these groups show them. And after all this time, we finally have an official piece of X-Men media that says what so many of us already figured out. Magneto was right. We are living in terrifying times, and now more than ever, we need these kinds of honest and upfront stories that refuse to hold back. The drama in X-Men 97 is nothing short of amazing, with a grander scope and far higher stakes than anything we ever saw in the original series. All of this is complemented with a great stylized cel-shaded look that I still can't believe isn't CG, and some truly creative, sick-as-hell fight scenes that make greater use of the X-Men's skill sets than anything I've ever seen with these characters before. Seriously, you can just tell the animators had an absolute blast working on these action sequences. The melodrama between the characters is also as strong as ever, with the relationships getting complicated in a genuinely captivating way. The story also continues and expands upon a number of plot threads from the original series, and it was honestly really surreal and satisfying to see this version of Cyclops and Jean learn that Cable's their son from the future after X-Men the Animated Series ended before they could get to that. Keep in mind, I'm new to X-Men the Animated Series, so I can only imagine how wild moments like these were for people who grew up with it. Now that I think about it, Cyclops and Jean were probably the highlight of the show for me. Their anxieties over raising a mutant son, as well as some new revelations that further complicates their relationship, made for some truly captivating drama. Side note, are you telling me that Cyclops was a cool character this whole time? Scott was the Chad to Logan's Virgin, and I had no idea. The X-Men film series lied to me. Pretty much my only real gripe with this show is that despite how much it does right by the X-Men as characters, it's kind of disappointing how we don't get a closer look into Magneto's history as a Holocaust survivor after the original series was forced to dance around it due to the whole 90s kid show thing, as well as how the show continues the trend of removing Sunspot's black features despite his mutant powers awakening in the comics as a response to being the victim of an anti-black hate crime. Regardless, X-Men 97 is something truly special, with a dark tone, great character drama, biting social commentary, and amazing action. X-Men 97 is straight up phenomenal, and the show that X-Men the Animated Series was always meant to be. Still not on Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaurs level though. I will never forgive those monsters for canceling it.
1,000,000 years dungeon!
And in the ultimate upset, an anime has managed to take the #1 spot in a Cartoons of 2024 ranking video. Admittedly, I'm not usually super interested in big mainstream anime that gain these massive followings. I don't know, those shows tend to use tropes that I just really don't like. However, I immediately got good vibes from this anime based on the handful of clips I saw floating around online, and lo and behold, I ended up finding Delicious in Dungeon to be every bit as delightful as the internet made it out to be. Based on the manga of the same name, Delicious in Dungeon, or Dungeon Meshi if you prefer its Japanese name, is a fantasy anime about a group of adventurers, Laios, an autistic golden retriever of a man with a special interest in monsters, Chilchuk, a perpetually grumpy short king, Marcel, a lesbian girl failure who would much rather be literally anywhere else, and Senshi, the most dad character to ever exist, as they journey through a massive dungeon to save Laios' sister, Fallen, from being digested by a dragon. However, because the party is short on cash and supplies, if they want to make it through the dungeon, they're gonna have to resort to eating the various monsters that reside within it. I know that it's been said countless times before, but Delicious in Dungeon's approach to world building is just so fascinating. Throughout the show, our heroes cook and eat numerous different monsters, with Senshi breaking down how to make them into proper meals, while also delving into their biology. This is such a brilliant and creative way to flesh out the setting. The level of detail that's put into these very believable monster recipes makes what very easily could have been a typical fantasy world feel unique and fully lived in. The titular dungeon is also such a fascinating location, being this sprawling, ever-shifting area where each floor has its own unique layout and ecosystem that makes it stand out from the others. You just get this genuine sense of adventure, seeing these characters explore and discover new things about this massive, absolutely bonkers dungeon. Despite the absurd amounts of danger lurking in every corner of the dungeon, Delicious in Dungeon has this really cozy, comfy vibe to it. It's just really nice seeing these characters sit down and enjoy these delicious meals that they've prepared, following their fairly frequent brushes with death. Speaking of characters, the main party is just so frigging endearing. All four of them have such great chemistry with each other, and as the show progresses, you really do get the feel that there's this growing sense of camaraderie between them. I'm told that this show has the same feel as the D&D campaign, and while I don't have any first-hand experience playing the game, due to the fact that it will require me to have some sort of social interaction, the four of them really do feel like this lifelong group of friends just trying to figure shit out. Their interactions are also absolutely hilarious. The combination of Laios' enthusiasm about monsters, Senshi's fixation on cooking, the world making sure that Marcel is always having a bad time, and Choshuk wielding the group's single brain cell leads to so much stellar comedy. Comedy that's only made better by the excellent vocal performances across the board. I swear, some of these line deliveries are just something to behold.
Such an honor.
We leave his corpse if he dies, okay?
Okay.
While all of this show is comfy, lighthearted fun, with some black comedy thrown in there for flavor, the humor never downplays or undermines what's at stake. In fact, the show has quite a few darker elements, as well as some compelling drama in the second half of the season, namely surrounding Fallon and how the party deals with her fate. To top it all off, the animation is done by the absolute goats at Studio Trigger, who once again deliver on making their characters as lively and expressive as possible, with plenty of gorgeous Sakuga sprinkled throughout the show. Literally the closest thing I have to a problem with Delicious in Dungeon is that Itsutsumi, the sixth ranger of the group, is introduced in kind of an awkward place in the show, roughly 3/4 into the season, giving us not as much time to really get a feel for her as a character, or for her to develop a strong relationship with the rest of the cast. However, it can't really be helped, given that's just how the story of the manga is paced, and considering that a second season's in the works, there's no doubt that my one minor gripe with this show will no longer be a problem by then. Delicious in Dungeon is simply an absolute joy to watch. It's a unique, fun premise that's executed flawlessly. Great characters, great world building, great animation, great comedy. Delicious in Dungeon is phenomenal in every sense of the word. It might be my favorite anime of all time, and is no doubt my favorite cartoon of 2024. And those were my top 10/top 12 cartoons of 2024. Hopefully I managed to hide my unbridled despair well enough to not bum you guys out too much this time around. In all seriousness though, things are rough out there, and they're only going to get rougher. So I can only hope that watching videos like this one served as a brief reprieve from the stress of the outside world, like what putting together this list was for me. Here's hoping that I have the willpower to not let my despair seep into future cartoon lists. God knows that's gonna be a serious challenge. Anyways, what were your favorite cartoons of 2024? Are there any shows that you like that I missed? Feel free to discuss in the comments below if you like. Maybe even consider subscribing if you're interested in listening to me ramble on about cartoons in list form. And you know what? Maybe 2025 won't be completely miserable. Maybe some small bits of good will come out of this year. For example, I actually began this year crossing the 1,000 subscriber milestone, which is super unreal, and I'm beyond grateful for all of you who thought my dumbass videos were worth keeping up with. Yeah, you know what? Maybe I don't have to be sad and cynical. Maybe I can start looking on the bright side of life. Maybe this will be the start of a new, more positive era of Stockman. Maybe I can... wait. If I somehow reach 1,000 subscribers, I'll cover Season 4 of Star vs. the Force of Evil on here. Oh, motherfuck!